I've been waiting 3 years to give this sermon. The reason I've been waiting 3 years to give this sermon is because there are some parts of it which are of the kind of get your act together. And I figured that would be a really bad sermon to give my first Sunday at St. Jude's. So I figured I'd wait until this reading came up again on Sunday. And of course, we're in a 3-year cycle. And so here we are. The reading that has the phrase, "Let the children come to me, do not prevent them." Before I say that, though, I just want to make an observation which I should not have to make, but then again, those of you who are parents, you probably understand that feeling of, why am I having to tell this intelligent human being this? The gospel today is explicit and clear in its teaching on marriage. Now, your past is your past, and so I'm not going to tell anyone that in light of today's gospel that anyone here is going to hell, because that's why we have confession. But I am saying that it is not Christian, it is anti-Christian to just ignore marital irregularities. We work with you, the church has options, etc., etc. There is a lot of people don't understand the whole living as brother and sister because they don't understand saying no to themselves in that area. I'm trying to keep this PG. If you don't know what I mean, ask me after Mass. But the fact is that Christ is explicitly clear on marriage, divorce, etc. Again, many of you have experienced particular circumstances which are not ideal. Many of you have fixed those circumstances, and that's good. Some of you may not still understand them, and I'd be glad to help you understand, but I will not water it down or change it just to make you feel better. I'm going to help you, but the truth is the truth, and I didn't design marriage. This is not Father Boland's idea. It's God's idea, and He is the one who established it, and therefore no man may separate what God has joined. But I do want to focus on this last part of the reading. I really wish Brody were here today because he was wearing his Captain America t-shirt. I guess we were all in superhero shirts that morning. And when I mentioned that I needed an army, he was a little bit in shock. And some of you are like, I don't remember you saying that. Well, that's because it was 3 years ago. I understand. I'm good. Has anyone actually kept up that practice? Any of you children keep those cards I gave you? Say that Hail Mary like I asked? Anyone? Raise your hand. No? You would hope. Good job, Mom. Are your boys saying it though? I know you are. Your boys are saying it too. Good job. All right. I don't feel like a complete failure. Excellent. Ethan, no drama. Thank you very much. Very good. It'll be okay. Yes, let the children come to me. I'll talk about that in just a second. Yeah, don't feel bad. But why did I do that? Not just to give you a false positive that I was a nice guy. But the reason I called the children up the way I did on that first Sunday was because this is what God wants. God wants the simplicity of children. God wants the openness of children. And He wants that from adults as well. The reason I work with children so much is not because I prefer to work with children. I prefer to work with intelligent adults. But the problem is well, they're very intelligent children, by the way. But the reason I do that is because children actually listen. You're like, Father, you're not at home with them. That's correct. Because I don't have the handicap of also having to tell them to brush their teeth and clean their rooms and eat their vegetables. So I can be the good cop. And because of that, they listen. And I see more fruits among children because of their docility, not because of their age. The adults that produce more fruit in my parish are the adults who are more childlike in their docility, in their confidence, in their trust, in their humility. And so when Christ says, let the children come to me, He is obviously in the text of this passage referring to biological children. But you know that elsewhere in the gospel he also says that you must become like children. So when he says, let the children come to me, that's all of us. Now, let's look at some of the many ways that this line can be read. So we have an affirmation in the gospel today of the indissolubility of a valid marriage. Remember, an annulment does not break a marriage. An annulment simply recognizes that something was wrong from the beginning and it's not a union to begin with. There are two purposes to marriage. The Catechism and the Code of Canon Law affirms that the matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership for the whole of life is by its nature ordered toward the good of the spouses and the procreation of children, the procreation and education of offspring. This covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. In order for there to be children to come to Jesus, there have to be children. He is populating heaven with us. And therefore, there must be more of us. Contraception not only violates the act in the way in which we come closest to being like God, but it also deprives souls of enjoying life eternal in heaven. Let the children come to me, do not prevent them. It should go without saying that once children are conceived, they should be permitted to be born. The dignity of the human person begins at conception. I don't argue this point. There is no argument. The only people who disagree of the dignity of human life in the womb are those people who hold higher other things. Every rational human being who has not been blinded by sin and selfishness and ideology understands that the life in the womb is a human life, and that to take that life is to take a human life. There is no argument. I have never encountered a person who disagrees with God on the dignity of human life in the womb who is actually able to be persuaded by an argument. You either recognize the fact that a baby human in the womb is a human, or you don't. And if you don't recognize that, then that's diabolical. Abortion is a manner of worshiping Satan, and it is in this country legal and common. And if that doesn't horrify you, there's a problem. Let the children come to me, do not prevent them. Because of the necessity of baptism, the law of the church again clearly states, parents are obliged to take care that infants are baptized in the first few weeks. As soon as possible after the birth, or even before it, they are to go to the pastor to request the sacrament for their child and to be prepared properly for it. And an infant in danger of death is to be baptized without delay. The birth of a child is not a surprise. You have time to prepare. And if a family is living their faith like they're supposed to, the preparation is very short. The reason why parishes have these long, drawn-out preparation and formation programs is because people come to the parish who have been baptized Catholic, and probably grandma is nagging them to get their child baptized, which is a good thing, grandmas, keep it up, okay? But a pastor is not to baptize a child without some hope that they will be raised in the faith. It's the only reason infants get baptized. And while I err on the side of mercy in that area, that's not the way it's supposed to be. You should come to me and say, and let's see, I can, oh no, we're not here. No one's here really, I think. Well, we do have a good example, right? Do we have a name yet? We're still, we do, okay, who is it? Eleanor. When Eleanor is born, they're going to come to me, and probably hopefully before that, set a date, and I'm going to say, oh, I know you. I see you every Sunday. You practice the faith and teach it to your children, as difficult as they might be in listening sometimes. And I'm going to say, oh, you know lots of people who are practicing Catholics that you can choose as godparents. I know them too. In this case, I'm not sure who the godparents are going to be, but, you know. And I'm going to say, good, when are we going to baptize? Because the formation process for baptism should be living your life as a Christian. That should be the formation. I shouldn't need to have particular meetings with families in order to know the family before a baptism, at least in a parish this size. Of course, parishes shouldn't be any bigger than this anyway. In fact, they should be much smaller, but that's for a different sermon. The point is that baptism is essential, and we should be baptized immediately. We don't need to wait until the grandparents can fly here. We don't need to wait for the first year birthday so we can celebrate them on the same day or some nonsense like that. The baptism needs to be as quickly as possible. You two listening? Good, okay. We've got some newlyweds here who have time to get it right from the beginning, right? Good. Let the children come to me, do not prevent them. At baptism, parents and godparents promise to form the child in the faith. This job is primarily the parent's job. It is not the parish's job. The parish does not exist for you to just live your life and then show up when you think it's time for your child to be confirmed or receive their first Holy Communion or have their quinceañera or whatever other ceremony that you want to have a party for. The formation of children is essential. If you do not raise your children and form them when they are young, they will not know how to come close to Jesus. And when they get older, they will very quickly abandon him. And so the formation of our children is essential, and it must start at home. Which is why in this parish, we do family catechism. That the parents are given the material, and that they only come in on a rotating basis every 4 weeks so that they can avail themselves of my presence, expertise, and my tutoring, so to speak, and then the other catechists who help me so that they can ask questions, get clarification, and their children can have that experience. But the catechism should be happening in the home, in the daily life of families. And I just want to point out something, since we do have at least some young families here. Your children can learn a lot very young. And you know that because you know how much they learn that you don't want them to learn from your words and example. So why don't you give them good example and teach them by your words and sit down and pray with them and teach them how to make the sign of the cross. Children learn a lot of things very young, like no! Right? They can also then learn holy things if you train them. Let the children come to me, do not prevent them. The closest that we ever get to Jesus in this life is at Holy Mass and in Holy Communion. And therefore, we must bring our children here to the foot of the cross in Holy Mass. But it's not enough for them to be physically present. One of the things we have to do is to teach our children how to participate. Now, when they're very young, there's a lot of what's going on with Ethan right now. And that's good. But even at that age, and you see them doing this, and you see other mothers doing this, that they're pointing things out, they're teaching, they're showing, they're explaining even to the smallest children. You know, it begins with things like, where's Jesus? And you have them point to the crucifix, right? And then sometimes they point to me, and that's all, right? But that's because they don't know me yet. But the fact is that we have to bring them no matter how much they squirm. And I want to make this point very emphatically, because we just had a great example of how it's supposed to be done, okay? They're going to be a distraction. And I despise those things that say, God put the wiggle in children. No, he didn't. That's because they're immature and unformed, okay? God doesn't put the wiggle in. That's just part of the process, right? But that's the way they are. And we accept that and hopefully train them to stop being that sooner rather than later. But the fact is that until they are formed in that way, they are going to be a distraction sometimes. The principle that I make is, or that I teach, is very simple. If there's anyone who cannot pay attention to Mass because of the child, it should be the parents of the child and not the entire congregation. This is why having two parents is always good too, because then they can take turns, right? Preferably not in the same sermon though, because if you do that, then no one gets the whole thing, period. Maybe alternating weeks, I don't know. However that works. But I want to assure parents, and those of you who are grandparents or great-grandparents, etc., something which is very difficult for us as human beings, as Americans, to accept. And that is the fact that our presence at Mass is more important, and our attempt to pay attention, than actually paying attention. I hear this, for example. Why didn't you go to Mass? Well, I woke up too late. I said, well, I've got a new Mass in Spanish. Well, I don't understand Spanish. So the commandment is not, thou shalt understand the Mass. The commandment is to keep holy the Lord's Day and to go to Mass. Understanding it is good, and we want you to, but the more important thing is your presence. Why? Because it's not about the sermon, and really it's not even about the text of the Mass, although they can be very beautiful. It's about being here and now when God makes his sacrifice present and the graces overflow from the altar even to those who are not receiving communion who are here present. Being in God's presence is itself holy and efficacious, even when we don't feel any different because of it. So again, if anyone is not able to pay attention, it should be the parents of the child, not the rest of the congregation. Although, on our part, and this is very important, we have to be patient. Because we don't know how hard the parent is trying, we don't know how difficult it is for the parent, we don't know what's going on with the child. They could be screaming for a very legitimate reason, and not just simply because they're brats and spoiled, right? That's not the, we shouldn't assume that, right? We have to be charitable and patient in that. I don't give the glare usually until it's like, a very prolonged one. And the only reason I do it here is because we have so many opportunities with glass and speakers for children to be taken out, and the parents can yet hear what's going on. If that were not the case, if we were in St. Monica's in Mishawaka, I'm only bringing that up because that's my friend's parish and I've been there, right? There's no glass, there's no cry room, there's no narthex, there's nothing. It's just a big, gorgeous, Baroque, echoey church, right? And you just have to deal with it. Right? But here we have options. So out of charity for everyone else, we ask, come to Mass, bring the little ones, and then when they are making a fuss such that the sermon can't be heard, or we can't concentrate during the consecration, then take them outside for just a minute. But just, again, a note for parents. I know there's very few small children here today, but again, you can teach this to other people as well. Don't use the narthex or the cry room as a playground. That is a laboratory for teaching discipline, but so that we don't have to hear the consequences of that. Right? When you go to the cry room, when you go to the narthex, continue to try and discipline them, but as you are going to fail often because of their age, again, we don't hear the consequences of that as clearly, although there are days when someone's having a really bad day in the cry room and you can hear it out here very clearly. And that's okay. It's to help. We're not being critical, but we are asking that for those who do have children, please bring them, but to do what you can so that they're not too much of a distraction. We didn't make copies this week, but I have an entire thing on this subject with some suggestions age-appropriate suggestions for when you bring your children to the church, whether that be for Mass, for adoration, for any public event, because we do want to help you. This is not just a keep that baby quiet kind of thing, right? This is formation and trying to improve. Let the children come to me and do not prevent them. And finally, I want to encourage with this line, all parents to allow your children to come to the Lord in the holy priesthood or in the consecrated life, if that is what God is calling them to. And I do firmly believe that more people are called, but because of the bad example of priests and religious and the bad advice or outright forbidding of parents, that more young men and women do not consider this call. Also, I'm reminded, just looking at some of our young people who I know fairly well, that sometimes parents allow a lot of distraction in their life and allow their children to get so enamored of certain worldly things that they lose track of holier things. And that's what I'm talking about here to parents today. Again, canon law. It's amazing how much all of this is codified in the church. The duty of fostering vocations rests with the entire Christian community so that the needs of the sacred ministry and the universal church are provided for sufficiently. This duty especially binds Christian families, educators, and in a special way, priests, particularly pastors. I know I'm doing my part, so families need to do their part as well. Some of them in this parish, of course, are doing so. So thank you all for that. I know there are a lot of people that think that their children will not be happy as priests, or who, far worse, selfishly prefer grandchildren, and that their son might be God's minister on behalf of men. We cannot have Jesus the way he wants us to have him without our priests. So please encourage your sons without being too forceful. We also don't want the idea that every good Catholic young man is to be a priest. There's a virtuous mean in the middle between the two. When I was telling people that I wanted to be a priest, all the old church ladies were going to my brother and going, "Are you going to be a priest too?" And he says, "No, I'm going to be married and have children." He's got 6, and they're wonderful, good Catholic family who married a good Catholic woman. They're working on creating their own parish at this rate. But we want that, and that's good. But we want to also encourage vocations. So really, I guess if you want the bottom line on this point is, what we need to be encouraging in children is not what do you want to be when you grow up, but what does God want you to be. And if we encourage that mentality and leave the rest to God, then he will call and we can support that instead of trying to control our children constantly in these things. Our existence is a gift from God who created us to know him, to love him, and to serve him in this life so that we can be happy with him in the next. It's a gift which comes to us by way of the family. I'll talk about that a lot more next week. This is essential. The family, marriage, sexuality, the things we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, these are the areas that we are most in trouble because these are the areas that Satan most attacks, which means that we have to be on our guard, no matter how old we are or young we are, no matter what our marital state is. We must guard God's design for marriage, God's design for the family, God's design for having children, to live that to the best of our ability. And let us ask the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph to make our families like theirs.